Veen, and I hope everybody had a chance to see those last two videos. And as with any great conference, there's a technology glitch somewhere. So as I bragged about being in the museum and being ready to roll with our virtual participants, we're having a little bit of a challenge on that front. But we also know that this is a really important panel that's coming up, so we're going to go ahead and get started and pipe them in at the appropriate time. So I would like to bring up, to then get us rolling, Alexei Monsarrat from the Atlantic Council, who's going to facilitate us through a really important conversation, because the majority of today's discussion has really centered on the private sector perspective. And if we can go back to the theme of today's conference, it's really about the private and the public sector. So we're incredibly honored to have a diverse representation of not just this nation's leaders in driving public-private partnerships on behalf of the workforce of this country, but equally from the global stage. So Alexei, if you and the panel want to join, and hopefully we'll get the others piped in momentarily.
Be on the right side, okay. So I'll be here.
Sure, I can see
here.
that.
Right.
Oh, good, good, good. As we often do.
I know.
Excellent. We've gone boy, girl. Everything's worked out.
Oh!
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alexei Monsarrat. I'm the director of the Global Business and Economics Program at the Atlantic Council. It's nice to see you all. Just very briefly, we have a largish panel, assuming the technology gets worked out, so I'm going to move through things fairly quickly. The Council comes at this from the perspective of the overall health of the global and particularly the transatlantic economy. We spend a lot of time thinking about how it is that the United States and Europe maintain their global standing and influence, and obviously a critical part of that is the global economy and the shape of our economy. So as a critical piece of that, of course, looking at the role of manufacturing and then skills. So we're coming at it from very much from that perspective. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and you all have the bio, so I'm actually gonna mostly skip that part, except to give you the sense that we have a very distinguished group. I'm excited to learn about what they have to say, and that. You know, this is really the panel that's devoted a little bit to the policymaker side, but we actually have a nice mix of people who are wholly public sector, but then also a few who are really right in that nexus between the public and private sector. So hearing from them will be instructive along all of the issues that we've been talking about. So very briefly, and I'll skip the people who are on Skype. We've got Peter Fischer, who leads the German Embassy's economics section here in Washington, which is a tough job, I can tell you, having been a former State Department person. It requires you to be expert on an enormous range of things, and so we're looking forward to hearing from him, especially about the things that Germany has going on here in the United States, which are extremely interesting. We have Kumar Garg, senior member of President Obama's Office of Science and Technology Policy, who engages a lot on the STEM education issue, and so we'll be looking forward to continuing some of the discussion that we've had from this morning about some of those issues. Mary Gershwin, who leads U.S.-Brazil Connect, whose video you just saw, which with its very soothing music, so hopefully you're all still relatively awake after lunch. And she's really in that space of a public-private implementer, and so we'll look forward to her perspective. And then last but foremost, Assistant Secretary Jane Oates, who leads the Employment and Training Administration section at the U.S. Department of Labor. And so we'll be able to really give us insight into what the Obama administration is thinking and the direction of policy at the federal level. To frame this a little bit, I just wanted to start out, each of you can tell us a bit about what it is that you're doing, but drawing a little bit from some of the morning's themes, as well as what I think the value of hearing from you all is, with the context that, one, the role of the public sector and the role of the private sector are becoming much more integrated as we go forward. This is something we've talked about all morning, and it's encouraging to see. And I'm interested to know how those interactions have been changing the way you set your priorities, and informing the way that you go about your work. And then, as well as, not least, how it is that you make your spending decisions, and how it is that you view what it is that you need to be supporting. And that's balanced against the fact that we're in an era where the question of who pays for things is increasingly difficult and increasingly important. And we heard a bit this morning about how do we get the balance right between what the private sector is spending on this, how does the government come in and support that effectively, and are we doing that right? So I'd like to open with you, Assistant Secretary, on those basic questions, and then obviously, given your position, we'd love to hear about where the Obama administration is headed on this, and sort of the principles that are guiding your work going forward.
So basically, my agency has about an $11 billion budget completely dedicated to all aspects of workforce. Everything from unemployment insurance to job training to apprenticeship programs to youth programs, names that you might recognize like Job Corps. And it's our responsibility to provide the statutory requirements of the Workforce Investment Act as well as the other laws that we oversee. That's kind of the mundane how it's always been, at least with the Workforce Investment Act since 1998. Which, by the way, has never been reauthorized, sadly. And if you remember 1998, as many of us do, it was a full employment economy. And this is a very different economy today in 2012. So the first thing we do is enforce and implement the law. But what are we doing differently? I mean, the law tells us that we are to serve two customers, the job seeker and the employer. And quite frankly, in the early implementation of the Workforce Investment Act under two different administrations, sometimes the employer partner was lost in the shuffle. And we came in and said we want to reinforce the fact that we also, in the public workforce system, work for employers. We work to find them the right fit. We work to make their business easier, at least the business of finding qualified employees. So there has been a tremendous push to get more guidance out to the field in our world on how business works and what business might need. Everything from how to improve your exporting or start exporting if you're a small business, and also if you're a large business, how can we make sure when you put out an application for a front desk person and get 3,000 applications, how do we help you weed that down to maybe the 30 that are really qualified for that job so we don't waste your HR department's time doing that? We have examples of that all over the country. We also have many examples where people are still not embracing that. So if you're in an area where your company is not actively working with the local workforce board, I would beg you to get in touch with them and start pushing them to work with you, or get in touch with me and I'll push for you. Happy to do that. So that's a big way that we're changing. The other way that we're changing, because I mean, I think there are two roles the federal government plays. One is to provide the infrastructure in dollars and personnel, because a governor every June 30th, when they balance their budget and put forward a new budget, doesn't know every new business need that's going to happen in his or her state. And having the infrastructure of the local workforce boards and the one-stop, the American Job Centers, the one-stop career centers, having that exist already, funded completely by the federal government, is a plus for all our constituents in every state. But the second piece that I think is our responsibility is to be a catalyst for change, to make sure that the best performing partners in our workforce system, both those we fund and those that are unfunded partners, like our community colleges and our K-12 system, that they have access to have a lighter risk when they're trying something new. And I think some of our grants that we've given out, the Recovery Act gave us a huge plus in money so that we were able to have a bigger field from which to look right now. Some of our grantees have done amazing things. In the world of our community colleges, they've expanded their partners. They've worked closer with community-based organizations. They've worked with high schools. They've worked with four-year colleges. But most importantly, all of the dollars we put out force them to work directly with business, force them to look at curriculum design with business, curriculum delivery, and also outcomes. What's the best outcome of success in my mind? That a business person hires a completer. And during the last several rounds of grants, we've seen businesses coming in and hiring people before they complete. And if I were to look at one of the best innovations that we've quantified, that's saying that all of our training dollars, and if you want to look into the future, we're asking that more cabinet offices look at this in their training dollars. All of our training dollars have to lead to an industry-recognized credential. That's good for business, and it's good for the employee as well, because they have proof of what they do. Previously, we only really did that in programs like our registered apprenticeship programs and on-the-job training. Now it's everywhere. And I'm delighted to tell you that by August of this year, we had already given 1 million people in the United States at least one credential, and over half of them got more than one credential. That means that employers know they have the skills when they apply for the job, and if by chance the employee has to change jobs, they have something to document their skills. So I'm going to stop there. As you know, I'm really excited about the changes that we've made, and I want to do a shout out, not because NAM is here, but NAM is representative of how we've been able to get to employers, both to tell them information and share information with them, but also to start a dialogue with them. They're not alone. CEWD has done the same thing for us in the energy sector. CompTIA has done the same thing for us in IT, and on and on. But you know, we really are serious about learning about business, and we have great tutors at SBA and Commerce who work with us every day to help us translate the jargon of the workforce into the jargon of the business world.
Thanks very much. Peter, I'd like to turn to you next, partly to hear about what you're doing, but also partly why. What is the incentive that is driving the German government to make these kinds of investments in the program that you're running? And what are the things that you're seeing or want to see from a U.S. perspective that will facilitate job uptake? I mean, the transatlantic space is incredibly rich in job creation and bilateral investment, and it's all we are each other's most important market. So I'm curious to hear from a policy perspective as well, what else you'd like to see.
Okay, I was going to divide my remarks into two parts. I'll make a third part for the policy one. The first two parts are some general remarks about Germany. I'll keep them very short. The second part of my remarks is going to be a plug for a program that we call Skills Initiative, which is a practical program here in the United States. And I'll talk about it and be grateful if you're interested in it, if you addressed me afterwards. And I'll come to the policy part. Now, in the previous session, we heard a lot of good things about Germany. And I'm pleased that Germany and other European companies sometimes get lauded for some of the good things they do, rather than being described as socialist kind of entities. And we like to say, no, we're not socialist, we defeated socialism about 20 years ago. And I could tell you a lot of good numbers about German competitiveness and success, particularly in the manufacturing space. Numbers that describe that you can have a country with high wages, relatively comprehensive regulation, strong unions, sort of good labor practices, and still be successful. But I'll just make a brief anecdote. I hope that most of you would agree that Made in Germany has a good sound to it. And a couple of months ago, I was flicking through the channels, and I rested with Letterman because Bono came out, Bono, the lead singer of U2. And I said, oh, Bono, that's interesting. And he was limping a bit, and Letterman said, well, you seem to have been not so well. And he said I had an issue with my back, with my spine, and I went to this great German doctor. His name is Müller-Wohlfahrt. And of course, Letterman had good fun at the expense of that name. But the people that follow the German soccer team know that Professor Müller-Wohlfahrt is actually the national soccer team's team doctor. So to cut a long story short, Bono went to Müller-Wohlfahrt, and he operated him, and he feels really good now. And Bono said, and now I've got Made in Germany on my rear end. And I thought that statement from somebody like Bono is much more important than any government activity and any numbers I could give you. And by and large, in Germany, government and the private sector tend to work more closely together than they do here. By and large, we are used to a higher level of government involvement. And the skills, we have an innovation strategy, we have a high-tech strategy where the government works with companies and universities and training providers. In the current legislative period, which is 2009 to 2013, people speak a lot about German-style austerity. We're trying to save money because we do have a balanced budget amendment in our constitution, and we will balance our budget by 2016. But the only part of government expenditure that's actually rising is research, development, and education. The current budget has a plus of 12 billion euros for that area. And one of the very good historic and traditional examples of public and private cooperation is skills training, the mid-level skill set between high school and university. We call it vocational training. You can also call it dual training. And this goes back to the Middle Ages, really. And the basic idea is that companies and training providers work together in an integrated fashion, from the conception, from the planning, through the execution, through the delivery of certificates and quality standards. There's 350 recognized professions in Germany, nationally recognized, and it can go from baker to barber to CNC programmer. And they're always being reevaluated. New professional certifications and requirements are being developed as business says these are the types of people that we're employing and that we need. And that system works quite well, and we say it's one of the reasons for our manufacturing sector's success. And now I'll come to what we call the German Embassy's Skills Initiative in the United States of America. When we go around and we speak to German companies here and we say, besides what's going well for you, what are the challenges? They all say that top of the list really is attracting and finding the people with the right skills. And they say the highly skilled people, well, we have to make great effort to find them, but it's not a systemic problem. Obviously, the universities produce highly skilled people. They're just hard to get. But there's a systemic problem in that mid-level skill set. And they say, they're just not trained right here. And they notice a difference from Germany, where businesses and training providers share this responsibility, to here, where the businesses complain they can't find anyone, but they're not, by and large, not ready to invest into training, and the community colleges there's a great variety of quality in the output of community colleges, put it that way. And so we said, can't we motivate the development of local clusters of German companies who know dual-style vocational training from home. They have it in their cultural DNA. You don't need to convince them to get together in local clusters with their local training providers and try to nudge them into a process where they do that basic thing that happens in Germany. Businesses and training providers share the responsibility. And we work with governors and mayors, and we kind of put a political umbrella over it with the ambassador and the governor or the mayor kicking off this process in a meeting, a type of a workshop that's aimed to guide the stakeholders in the right direction. And we imagine some kind of practical outcomes, projecting demand. How many people with what kind of qualifications will we need in the next 5 or 10 years? Developing the curriculum together, working on the training sites together. Often companies are happy to give their equipment to a training site to say, if they're going to study mechatronics, might as well do it on my equipment. Marketing is a big problem because this type of training has a a cultural stigma attached to it, needs to be overcome. And then we can see things like, the best outcome would be dual type of training programs, earn-to-learn programs. And then we can see twinning of training institutions and recognition of American training qualifications according to a German standard. And we do have an example of best practice. That's in the Charlotte, North Carolina region. There's over 300 German companies there, many manufacturing. And they have, without anybody's, assistance, gotten together as a group. We should share or represent our interests together, and we should pool our resources. And they work with one community college called Central Piedmont Community Colleges, which has a very high standard. And this initiative was actually mentioned by President Obama in his last State of the Union as exemplary. So all we're trying to do is take that example of very good practice and spread it around the country. Everywhere the ambassador mentions it to governors and says, is this a priority? Is this an issue for you? Skills gap. And they say, it's not an issue, it's a priority. So we're, on the 5th of December, we're having a meeting in the cabinet room of the governor of Ohio. We're working with the governor of Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Texas. I'm not sure whether I'm forgetting anyone right now, and the mayor of Chicago. And we're just trying to spread a good practice with the help of German companies. But the important point is it's not limited. Of course, it's not limited to German companies. We just, because we're the German embassy, we approach German companies because they have that background. But any company in that area that's willing and able to participate is more than welcome. So if your companies or your organizations are interested in this, I'd be delighted if you could approach us. And we find that we run into open doors when we talk about these issues. There's a lot of good things happening, but the connection between them ought to be strengthened. And final word, we have kind of a team effort. We have the embassy that's kind of giving a political push to this, so the word gets out, so that regional initiatives start. We have something called GIZ, which is actually, it's our development organization that helps many countries in the world develop vocational training systems. But they said, okay, we're going to go to Charlotte, and it's good and fine to have a bottom-up initiative, but you will hit limits where you need to improve the system, where you need to go to the regulation. For example, community colleges serve their county. So if a company's on the other border of the county, there's a hurdle for them to overcome. So we will go to Charlotte and try to advise Charlotte, that Charlotte region, do a proof of concept and improve the system in a way so things can be scaled up. And we have the German American Chambers of Commerce who can help with certification of individual training programs according to a German standard or mutual recognition of certifications. They've done it with the Central Piedmont Community Colleges. There's 5 training courses which are mutually recognized. So that's a very good argument also towards inward investors who come and say, oh, I understand exactly what's going on here because I know that standard from Europe. And the unique selling point of the Chambers of Commerce is that in Germany, the training qualifications are awarded by the local chambers of commerce and industry. So the 3 players fit very nicely in for a bottom-up initiative, and we're trying to do 5 or 6 regional things, and then late 2013 come back to DC, have a lessons learned conference. Oh, and what we need to do policy space.
Let me actually, I want to pause there just because that'll take us in a slightly different direction. I want to stay for a minute on the education piece and turn to Kumar briefly and be a little bit provocative in saying that the Germans have arrived to educate us. And how do we feel about that? And what do we need to be doing to be filling some of those gaps on our own? And how is the president seeing this? And how are you advising him to proceed on that?
Well, thank you again for having me. I work for the White House Office of Science and Technology for the President's Science Advisor. And one of the first things that, and I've had the pleasure to now work for him for 4 years, and we're excited about the second term. I think one of the things the President sort of articulated, and it's very clear for those of us who work for him, is that he tries to think about how can we line up policy and investments that have a long-term impact on American competitiveness. So even while we're having lots of debates and conversations about the immediate short term, how do we put America on a sustainable path, both to renewal and recovery, but then also to next generation jobs. Part of that was that we led a process early in the administration to create an American innovation strategy, actually start to put together a lot of the different things, whether we're doing in advanced manufacturing, whether we're thinking about next generation infrastructure, whether it's education. But the big thing was we created sort of this pyramid as to what are the key building blocks that are going to fuel American renewal and next generation jobs, and education was a key part of that. So both sort of STEM education and thinking about K-12, but then also workforce development. I think the President, when he's talked about how important this is, does look to the fact that we need to be doing better when it comes to international benchmarks. So it's why the President articulated a 2020 goal around college completion. It's putting us back towards the first in the world in college attainment. It's why the President has talked about in STEM education specifically that it's really not acceptable that we're 17th by certain standards and 25th by others when it comes to math and science in international benchmarks, and we need to be doing a lot better of a job. So I think international comparisons matter a lot, and it's been an immensely important part of how it's informed the President's view. I still remember when the President came back from one of his first Asia trips, he had this great conversation with the Prime Minister of South Korea, and they were talking about K-12 education, and he was talking to him about, my big problem is our parents are too demanding. And the President couldn't stop talking about it for like the next month. He's like, I just had an education meeting where they said, the parents really want a ton, and we don't know how we're going to figure this all out. And he came back and said, look, we have to think about this as a multi-pronged strategy. So part of what we've always thought about on a policy side is one, how do we sort of set up the system for innovation? So in K-12 education, a big focus was race to the top, which was how do we not only sort of think about K-12 reform by helping K-12 education through this really difficult time, but then also set up a large grant program which actually fuels innovation at the state level. But the President also, and in that program, we built STEM education as a core priority, and a bunch of states have taken that STEM priority to build STEM schools, really focus on K-12 teachers. And the second part was the President said, we have to articulate what are some of the key things we need to do. One big part of that was recruiting the next generation of math and science teachers. So the President in the State of the Union set a goal to recruit 100,000 excellent math and science teachers. The best evidence tells us that if you have somebody in the classroom that has a really deep content background and the pedagogical skills to teach it, that they end up making a huge difference. I think that has been a great example of a public-private partnership because when we announced that we were talking about something that we could do in the budget and through policy, there's actually now a coalition called 100K in 10, which represents over 100 different organizations, 15 different funders that have raised over $30 million in support of that initiative and are now saying to Congress, hey, the private sector is standing up, what are ways that government can stand up as well. I would say the third part, and this I think that has been a real focus for the President, which is the culture piece, which is how do we get kids excited about this. I think one of the things that these were actually earlier surveys that the Manufacturing Institute did, which is they went around and they asked kids, when we say the word manufacturing, what mental images pop into your brain? And they were like, sort of dark factories and like conveyor belts. And they said, we can't, that's not even 20th century manufacturing. Talk about, so we're like off by 150 years when it comes. So they said, that's a big problem if you're going to say, hey, there are important jobs in this area. So I think an important part of the conversation, we helped create the first White House Science Fair where we brought in kids that are doing incredible things, but are doing this in lots of different ways, from building robots to being makers in their communities and, building new projects. I think the big sort of tying it back to the conversation that's happening here, I think the big policy conversation when kids turn into adults is the fact that our workforce system is going through massive change. So John Seeley Brown talks about it as the half-life of skills. So the half-life of skills is going way down, which means the same set of skills and knowledge sets that will sustain you in a career is getting less and less. You have to learn more, which means whether we talk about it as formal training or training on the job, we constantly have to learn. The second big thing is that we're doing a lot more job switching. You know, folks in the course of their career are going between 5 and 6 jobs, not just career laddering within one company. That means our workforce development system has to be a lot more innovative in giving people just-in-time training. So I think this is why James' points were totally right, which is part of the reason why we talk about public-private partnership is not just in the sense that, hey, this is a resource-constrained time, so we all need to be in this together. It's that in a world in which skills are rapidly changing, you constantly need the market to be signaling what are these new skill sets. Part of the idea that we are really excited about and been working with Department of Labor on is how do we start to think about consortia of companies coming together around skills? Because if if this is an area where we think companies are likely to underinvest on their own, right? Because especially if employees move between companies all the time, training that happen within a company is likely not to be at the level that you may want at the public level. And so this is a really ripe area for public-private investment. And I think this is a really rich conversation. And I don't want to. You get to have, so I'll give the podium back.
Thanks, and it's a perfect bridge, and there's lots of things we'll come back to, but it's a very nice bridge to you, Mary, where you're engaging youth and also providing us with a perspective from an emerging economy. Here in the U.S. we have a tendency to be in transmit mode a lot of the time, and could probably do with a little bit more listening, especially when it comes to innovation and in different areas. So I'm interested to hear about what you're doing and a little bit to this question of how do you keep youth engaged and how do you get them engaged?
Well, one thing that works to get youth engaged is to invite them to go to Brazil. And I'm serious about this. And I wanted to thank Jennifer and Brent for convening this forum and for giving an international lens for the opportunity for this, because frankly, I'm not kidding. We talk about how important STEM careers are, and yet how do we connect it with what's happening in manufacturing internationally? Do we turn it into a global experience, into a global exploration, into something that is frankly I think I mentioned in my question earlier in the day, who ends up going abroad? It tends to be something that liberal arts students do. Why isn't this something that we've prioritized and said, manufacturers, if we're really going to be competitive with the world, we need to know the world. So that's what US-Brazil Connect is about. And I have to say it's great to be in this room with friends that I've worked with in workforce development for 20 years. And for about the last year and a half, I went back to really focus on Brazil. I was an exchange student there in 1976. And at that time, Brazil is, I think, what many people still think about it. It was half the population was illiterate. It was extremely, you could walk down the street, you could tell who was rich and who was poor. Today, it's the 6th largest economy in the world, 200 million people, and most importantly, from 2000 to 2008, 30 million people moved out of basic poverty into the first rungs of the middle class. And they've made a concerted effort across all aspects of policy to begin to address that very, very deep gap between the rich and the poor. And they're making progress. And kind of to the question of how do we get youth involved and how do we, what do we do? I think number one is we need to do more than just look at the international comparisons and be afraid. We need to look at the international comparisons and get to know, really get to know what's going on in the world. And so what we did at US-Brazil Connect is we formed a consortium starting with 3 US community colleges and went to Brazil, and I had done several projects in Brazil with the US Embassy, enough to know that the Brazilian Confederation of Industry is an amazing model of a partnership, a public-private partnership. It's it's kind of almost, there's not anything like it in the United States. And on one arm, it's kind of like the National Association of Manufacturers, a lobbying body, but it also has a 2.5% payroll tax, which funds a training network, education and training network, which serves about 7 million people throughout Brazil in both the K-12 system and a training system. And with that funding model, what's happened is as Brazil's economy has grown, and I'll pause because you're going to be kind of shocked, their funding for education and training has grown because it's tied. Yeah, it's a really interesting concept. And I just have to note that, you know, in the same time that these, they've made tremendous investments in education, my home state of Colorado has cut funding, public support for higher education by 40% since 2000. And I think that, you know, what is it going to take to shake our minds loose and to do something in this country? I'm hoping that, you know, I think one strategy that we just need to do is not only to provide the opportunity for more youth to have experience of what's going on. You go to a country like Brazil now, I mean, you walk down the street, you don't know who's rich and who's poor, but you know who's hungry, and you know who's working, and you see this emerging, you know, this emerging generation that has a taste of what their future can be and is willing to work for it. And then you also have a country that's willing to invest in that emerging generation. And so we went to the Brazilian Confederation of Industry, and with the advice of actually Marianne Dringa, the chair of the National Association of Manufacturers, I asked her if we were to do anything to bring U.S. community colleges together with Brazil, what would really make a difference? And she said, internships. Get our students from U.S. community colleges to Brazil. So we took them the idea. We said, we can provide you a new way for Brazilians to learn English, because fewer than 10% of Brazilians, they're very similar to us, they're monolingual, fewer than 10% speak English, and they need other strategies. I said, we can bring you a cadre of U.S. community colleges students that will make your students want to speak. And so give us the opportunity for them to come to Brazil and do internships. We will provide, we will help your students learn English. They said yes. They provide paid internships for a month. They pay the students, cover our hotel, all the food, and local transportation. And then we do recruitment and training, do work on Facebook, and then go down there and spend a month. It's very hard, it's very challenging, and it's life-changing. But the interesting thing is they said yes, they funded it, and they want to grow it. We're expanding now to 7 cities in Brazil, and we'll take a team of 70 people. So I think the opportunities, those opportunities matter not only for the students that we take, but they really need to matter for all of us in terms of bringing this need for change to a much more visceral level. And I'll just close with, well, 2 things I want to just also reference Brazil's Science Without Borders initiative. The Brazilian government, it's about $1.5 billion that they're investing. It's to provide funding for 100,000 Brazilians in science, in STEM careers, to study abroad for a year. And that the first wave of students is now studying throughout the world, and their objective is to build that science and engineering, that talent you talked about this morning, Craig talked about this morning as being essential. They're building that. And the Confederation of Industry is just in the process right now in a $750 million expansion of their system for their capacity for training and innovation. And we hosted, in Denver, we hosted a group of students that were selected. We worked with 200 students in Salvador for a month. You saw pictures of some of them. They selected 10 of those kids. They're all low income, and funded for them to come to Colorado for 14 days. And some leaders of the Industry Association came as well, and we held a forum in Denver. And one of the things that really struck me is that as we stood there, you know, in the room, and we had leaders from the community, but we also had students from Science Without Borders, and also from that group of students from Brazil. And the executive said, you know, Brazil is 20 years behind having the competitive workforce that it needs, and we're going to change that. And as I listen to that and I see the decline in investment and kind of how long do we continue to just have these conversations in this country? Because in 20 years, it's really, it's already changing, and we just need to wake up to that.
I want to turn this to the audience fairly quickly, just because we've got a great group, and I know you want a chance to ask questions. So be thinking of those as we go through this next round. But I'll do one more basic question here, and then we can do that. I want to continue a little bit on the image of manufacturing theme, and link a bit to youth. You know, I think you do have on the one hand the perception problem of is manufacturing still a possibly late 19th century Dickinsonian sort of undertaking. But if you look at the Deloitte data, I mean, it really is a deep concern about its future, particularly here. And that's a pretty well-informed and legitimate question, which is my job going to be outsourced by the time I get good at it? And in a globalized economy, is that going to be an ongoing issue? The way I'd like to approach that, and Peter, I would start with you. What is your sense of the perception of manufacturing in Germany? My guess is going to be that it isn't the same as it is here, and I could be wrong. But if there are things that you think are replicable about the way that the sort of German system works in promoting a better image, and then sort of how we might learn from that. Yeah,
I don't agree entirely that in Germany there should be a pessimism about manufacturing. There's not. We're 22% of our GDP is in manufacturing, and that adds a lot of value to the economy, a lot of jobs. It's a place of technology development, innovation development. So we're not pessimistic about it at all. I don't think you should be pessimistic about it in the United States. Some of the reasons for the outsourcing relative, how do you say, the relative cheapness of labor is changing. The trend is turning around. You've got an ongoing energy revolution in the United States, which will make manufacturing more competitive here. And you really have, there's that skills gap. We hear stories about US companies that want to relocate from wherever they are in a foreign country to, let's say, somewhere in the Midwest, and they say all the conditions are right, except we can't find the skilled workforce that we're looking for. So that's a big barrier. It is a huge difference between Germany and the United States is the perception of work in manufacturing. In Germany, if you do this type of dual training, you know you can get a recognized qualification that will lead you to a safe and solid professional career with good pay, and most of all, in good standing in the community. People will respect your skill and what you do. You won't be kind of labeled as someone who didn't manage to do the right stuff in life. And we hear that. My evidence is anecdotal, but I'll come back to our cluster of best practice in the Charlotte region. There's about 10 or 12 German companies that partner with this community college. They go to high school job fairs, and students stop in front of their stand and they say, I'm interested in technology. This could be interesting. I earn to learn rather than taking out a loan to learn. And I can go directly into my career, and maybe he says, I'm not that much of an academic type anyway, more practically oriented, but I'm not, still I've got enough skills that I want to continue learning. And then the parents will come and tuck them at the elbow and say, don't stop here, go over to the junior college over there, that's more your thing. So this cultural dimension is a big problem, otherwise people won't go for it. Yeah. And I'd like to turn to Jane and Kumar on a similar question, in the sense that, you know, the president's talked about often when he talks about green jobs and some of the newer things, he adds the line that can't be offshored. What do you see as the right role for the government, from each of your perspectives, in getting out this message that these are jobs that are going to stay and that are dependable and reliable?
But maybe even more importantly, and Mary, you might have views on this as well, what do you need to be hearing and what do you need to get out of the business community to help support that message so that you can essentially justify spending taxpayer money on training people for jobs that you can reliably say are going to exist?
Do you want to start?
Sure. So I think, this was a big topic. So the president has a thing called the President's Councils of Advisors in Science and Technology. So they're this group that gives, and one thing they tackled was the topic of advanced manufacturing, because one thing that they were really interested in is, what does manufacturing look like in the United States in the next 20 to 30 years? I think one interesting thing about this has been that whereas our manufacturing production and productivity has gone way up, obviously manufacturing employment has gone down over the past 10 to 20 years. I think the big question that the field is trying to figure out is, what does manufacturing look like in the future? And I think Peter's certainly right that there's a number of cross-cutting trends, right? So one thing that is really interesting is the United States has a burgeoning open hardware movement, right? There's like all these folks, so if you look at a startup like Y Combinator, which funds new startup companies, in their most recent round, they had the largest number of hardware-based companies that they funded. So this is a largely software-based incubator that's now funding hardware companies, because a lot of folks are saying that you can now do product development and prototyping at much lower costs because of the decreased cost of fabrication and digital tools. So I think there's an opening set of folks that say that we can build a lot more here and in different ways, and we can do mass customization. I think a second thing is, as Peter mentioned also, is that there is a little bit of a trend in insourcing. President's talked about this, which is a lot of companies are finding that when it comes to logistics, quality, and other reasons, it makes sense to bring jobs here, and that obviously that puts a policy focus on us onto thinking about the training piece. I think the third one is, and I think this is really important, which is we have to train people in ways that allow them optionality on career path, which is the way you try to think about skills is that you actually put them on a career trajectory that allows them, because they're going to have 4 to 5 jobs. How do you put them on the ability to transition between jobs and pick up additional skills along the way? Because we don't know what will be the big industries. Part of the reason why we do invest so much on R&D, and the president has had a big focus, is when you're the country that's on the leading edge, we're going to have to create new industries, new products, and new services, and that's going to be a big part of our growth story. We're not going to be able to do a jump ahead by saying, hey, this is a really big industry, we should have a piece of it here in the United States. So I think that raises really important questions. I think on a policy side around training, we, one, need to make sure, in K-12 space, I think it's just about getting people college and career ready. So we have a huge college dropout problem. We have not enough focus on STEM. When it comes to workforce, I think it's about how to tap these institutions. I think what Jane and Department of Labor have invested in is a lot of the community college partnerships have been very focused on these new areas of growth. So advanced manufacturing and elsewhere.
Right. I mean, I think I'll attack the other piece of the question, which is really how do we change what has become in America. We want our children to do better than we've done, and that's always been around attainment of post-secondary credentials, and they've been defined more and more as degrees. My mom and dad were not college educated, as many people my age in the room may share, but they saw success as getting me a college degree. Now, they were immigrants, so it had to be a college degree that was really vocationally oriented. I'm a teacher by training. They're probably very unhappy in their graves that I'm a policy person and not a teacher right now. But I think we have to change parental perception. We have to not only teach them that in the 21st century, you're not making a lifelong decision at 18. When I was 18, you either went to college or you didn't. In the 21st century, there's going to be lots of opportunity for young people to go directly to work, make a salary, do as you say, earn money instead of being dependent on student loans, but then go back and get an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree or a PhD later in life. That really didn't happen very much in 1975 when I graduated from college. But in order to make that perception a reality, we've had to work hand in hand with our partners at the Department of Education. And part of the work we've done with the community college folks, is working on articulation and transfer agreements from 2- to 4-year colleges, which seemed like the big burden. But when you peel back that onion, the real burden is that at a community college, there are 2 distinct institutions, the credit side of the house and the non-credit side of the house. And we've been asking colleges to build bridges. We are investing in Central Piedmont. We're a part of the Siemens work. We've done a lot of work there with some of the smaller German businesses to help Piedmont say, when you're, whether it's a registered apprenticeship program or a program that's less formalized than that, how do you look at the content of the curricula and give college credit where it's appropriate, not diluting anything, not diluting the associate's degree. But that means when someone gets into their job through the training, they have 9 or 12, or if you're working in an area like electrical, sometimes 30 or 40 credits, much more likely for that person at any age to go back and get a degree, and much more rigorous training, because every business person that I speak with, it's not just the acquisition of a technical skill. It's the knowledge that goes around adapting that skill when the business needs to adapt it. So, we could train other primates to move tools, but we can't train them to adapt when those tools become obsolete. And that's what the training that we're proposing, and the reason community colleges are so critical in that, is it has to be not only skill-based, but knowledge-driven, so that as they learn the skill that you need today, they have the ability to learn the next skill that you might need in 5 years. That's where we have to get parents to understand that. It is not a death sentence to being a high school completer when you go to work directly from high school. We're going to make sure that there are clear pathways to 2- and 4-year degrees. And the fact that we have so many grantees in our Trade Adjustment Community College Capacity Building Program that have 4-year partners, and in our Workforce Innovation Fund have grantees like Carnegie Mellon who are looking at doing this from the top down, as well as our community colleges doing it from the bottom up.
Did either of you want to comment on that?
I would just, I think Jennifer said something earlier when she opened it, that the problems we're facing are not solutions, but they're about leadership. And I think about Kali Hutter and what she's doing at ClickBond to provide leadership to have employers step up, because we have tuition reimbursement programs, and getting just leadership so that employers are making it just, what is their role? What are they going to do specifically? And I think that the National Association of Manufacturers, with people like Kali and Mary Andringa, their chair, to say, we're going to invest in equipment, we're going to do our tuition reimbursement, and just to be very clear, and then to teach each other. And I think that leadership from the business community is critical.
I am happy to turn to you all if you would like. This is your chance to complain to the government. So I don't know who passes that
I have to go.
I'm going to be a little kinder. I'm not going to complain to the government, actually, Secretary. So I'm going to build off what you said just a little bit. And I will say much of this theme, and I will acknowledge that this is not uncommon in a manufacturing forum, really focuses on the future workforce. And trust me, I know, my Social Security depends on the next generation. But I also am incredibly realistic that we have a huge adult population. And we need to build the same kinds of bridges to bring them actively back into the workforce, be it our transitioning veterans, be it our single moms, be it any or all of the above. And what can we do to help elevate the dialogue that the workforce is more than just the next generation? That's important, because it's going to take a generation to build what we need. But we also have those jobs that go wanting today. And how can we, from a policy perspective, help incentivize and accelerate that broad-based perspective with as much priority as we do the statistics that we've seen? Mary, I love your comment of don't fear the numbers. Mm-hmm. Celebrate and let's get going. So I'd welcome your feedback on that particular element as it relates to the balance of the workforce and their engagement.
I think dislocated workers and disadvantaged adults are the present as well as the future. Because if you're a business person, you can't look at somebody in the 9th grade and hope that they'll still be interested in you in 4 or 8 years, whatever it is, when they're finished. You have to do both. So I hope we're not looking at it as an either or. As the business people that I speak with all the time say to me, they really like people who have a work history. So than someone who's 18. You have things that you have to pay for, whether it's a mortgage or rent or a car payment or insurance. So therefore, for you to go into old-fashioned training is just not going to work. You can't take 2 years because nobody's going to fund you for that long. So models like on-the-job training, models like co-ops where they can go to school part-time and work and make a salary part-time, and models like registered apprenticeship where they can start at one level and move up and earn more money as they earn more credentials. Those are models that work really well for both young people and not so young people. And I think we have to promote that more. You know, last year we put $75 million out to states because we had a rollover money in national emergency grant funds. Wasn't enough to end the fiscal crisis, so we put it to good use, we thought. But states had a really hard time getting employers to buy into on-the-job training. When we were covering 50% of the salary for up to 6 months, up to 90% of the salary for those who faced real barriers to employment. And it would be really helpful if the business people could get us information back about how we could make that easier. You know, we have states that have done a terrific job. Montana, Missoula, Montana, there are 5 companies that called me unsolicited and said, I couldn't have stayed in business this year if it wasn't for that OJT. I couldn't have stayed in business. Now, it was 2 employees here, 3 employees there. On what could have been a dead air resume. So it's a win-win. And we'd love to hear from you how else we can get people on your job site, because putting the best community college in the country, the best 4-year university in the country, can't get relevance unless they have people working on your site. Whatever, in a variety of views in that sentence. You know, but I mean, the bottom line is the best professor can't today teach what's happening on your company floor today. So if the more we, and the co-op programs in this country are just drying up. I mean, Drexel in Philadelphia and Northeastern in Boston used to be dynamic. 100% of their kids do it, and they're both walking away from it. And we need to get more institutions doing that model so that employers can teach people what we refer to scientifically as the secret sauce of working effectively at a business. I don't think it's taught well, and I think you could teach it much better.
We do have our Australian and Indian colleague on the line.
Okay.
You can't see them.
I think they're just about to queue up.
Okay, so in a second, we'll turn to them. And so why don't we, unless anybody wants to comment on the remainder of that question.
A quick comment and a question for Peter here, but my comment gets back to all the credentials. In North Carolina, we love to push for credentials, but there's a challenge for our colleges, and I imagine it goes across the country for community colleges, is we want the workforce nirvana. We want to be able to award credit for those credentials. We need a single clearinghouse where all those credentials can be put that our colleges can access. So that's the comment. We don't have that.
We have it.
We don't have that.
ETA.gov, www.doleta, all one word, .gov. Search for credentials. We have a credential website that lists every credential.
No, for the student. If a student comes to us, and we need to have that on their transcripts. We need to be able to pull it up. That's what we need. Someday, that workforce nirvana, to be able to get that.
Which I was going to say, Illinois is probably the furthest ahead on that.
Right.
I'm sorry, I thought you
That's
just
a big
wanted a
issue.
repository for someone to see all the credentials in an industry sector.
But my question for Peter, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't know enough about what Central Piedmont has done. I'm at the system office, we're large, they're running like crazy. But if we were to sit in that meeting with you when you're talking to those governors and mayors, what are the first 3 steps for those communities to take if they do not have a conglomeration of German companies? What would be their steps?
That's difficult for me to answer, but they'd have to find a cluster of companies, no matter what the national background of those companies is, that face a skills gap, that overcome the flip side of the cultural problem that exists with students and their parents. There's an issue with managers who say, why should I invest into training when I may lose this person? I want the market to deliver it to me. At the same time, they bemoan that the market isn't delivering it. So one of the big jobs is how do you retain that person once you've invested into his training? And that's a difficult one. So a cluster of companies, and then find your best community college that's willing to set up a program in an integrated fashion with some of the outcomes that I mentioned before. And if I can, I'll just comment on the modular type of training and changing jobs and job directions during life. And in Germany, the system has always been, and places great emphasis on, how do you say, connectivity between the different courses of study. So you will find hundreds of examples of the most important businessmen in Germany who started with a dual type of training. Yesterday I was in Atlanta, where they did the groundbreaking for the Porsche driving experience, and the CEO of Porsche was there. His first course of training was toolmaker. And you can't say that he doesn't have a cool job today being the CEO of Porsche.
Can I push a little bit more, but sorry, before we get to the next one, on the cluster issue? Is a cluster effective because they all happen to be German, or are there other traits that they're sharing that helps you decide, or that brings them together as a cluster, such that
they have a demand for a skilled workforce, and they're willing and able. They're willing to invest some resources, and then they have some know-how in the company to know what to invest those resources in. And then they need a partner on the training side. In Germany, it's companies, and we call them professional schools. And those are state-run, government-run, and run by our states. Like the USA, we're a federal state with individual states. And so the responsibility for those training schools is with the state. Now, our big advantage, I think, over the USA in this whole space is that our system is comprehensive and national. If you hire an electrician or a welder, or again, a baker or a barber, you know that he will have he has that qualification, so you have a pretty good idea what his skills level is, regardless of whether it's up in the north or down in the south. But that's, of course, something that has evolved since the Middle Ages. You can't get there overnight in the USA. So what we're trying to do with our skills initiative is something bottom-up. Just show best practice, get people excited about it, try to build it up. But at some point, it's good if it comes from the top down, but from what I've learned is that traditionally a lot of legislation in the United States does work that way. It comes from communities to the states, and then at some point the private sector goes to Washington and says, we're dealing with a hodgepodge of regulation, help us with something federal.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that, you know, the German model, the way I've seen it in North Carolina, is incredible. But if you look at Toyota, where they are, I mean, they do a very similar model. They hub. Mercedes-Benz does it in Southern Virginia. Toyota does it in both Mississippi and Texas. The shipbuilders do it in Norfolk, and they're doing it in Pascagoula. In those two last instances, they're building apprenticeship schools to do it. The oldest apprenticeship school is in the Norfolk business area. But what they're doing is saying, what are the common denominators of skills that our subs need and we need, and let's build a program with the community college to do that, so that in auto manufacturing in the Texas area, it's not just who's working at the Toyota plant, but who's supplying their tires and their nuts and bolts and their paint, and what are the common elements that we need. Sometimes it's very interesting, their precision career and technical vocational school skills. Sometimes they're soft skills. Sometimes there are things like team building, working in a team, or looking at outcomes or doing analytics rather than what would be a common course. But I think it really is the way of the future, because we have to remember that the community colleges, when there's not sufficient federal funding, have to have a model that's sustainable for cost. They can't develop a program for company X if company X is only going to hire 3 people a year. That's not cost effective. So this clustering really enables a college to invest in it and have the positive outcomes for their graduates.
And big companies and small companies can share resources. The big German companies, they'll put a training facility out in the front of the factory. There's Walker Chemicals in Tennessee. Their plant isn't even ready, but they already have a $3 million training facility. And oftentimes we find that the big ones say, the small ones say, well, we can't do that. We're 20 people, but we still have training requirements. Can we pool resources with you, big guy? And the big guys are usually quite happy because they say that helps us to, how do you say, the efficiency of our training facility, fill it with more students, we benefit too.
Hi, my name is Mi-kyung Ryu. I'm with the American Council on Education. We represent college campus presidents from all sectors, including 2 years, 4 years, and private, for-profit, public, all. I would like to share some idea which I believe is a low-hanging fruit we can pick up on easily, and we could lead to long-term effect. Having a difficulty to find trainable workers. In earlier session, we talked about it's undeniable, but retaining those who are trained in your company is another matter. So when you are faced with the high job turnover rates, I think one of the solution to that is to make sure the corporate training, the employer-based training, is not dead-end education, and it will turn into some sort of the stackable credentials. So one of the things that our organization has been doing over 40 years now is to send out a team of faculty to corporates and military to evaluate the training programs in their base, and then translate that into academic credits, which could then be credited as academic credit at campuses. So, the over 80% of those who participate in the training and get a transcript from ACE actually succeeded in translating that into academic credit at campuses. Well, not all campuses are accepting those credits yet, but because of the high success rate coming from the participant adult students, I think it has a very promising potential. Now, speaking of the public policy needs, most of larger companies now offer tuition benefits, and partially it's motivated by the tax write-off benefits that employers can reap from. If we can provide some tax benefits of similar type to companies who actually participate in this credit evaluation, and then make sure their employees will stay in the job by pursuing a further professional development and at local colleges or other campuses. So this goes beyond community colleges, four-year campuses. So those who are working in the companies who wanted to pursue advanced degree, take that credit from their company's credit and then translate it into the campuses. So a lot of times we see out of about 120 credits that are typically required for a bachelor's degree, about 30, 40 credits, they will have a head start from the beginning. So this is a really feasible idea. I wonder what do you think about this possibility in the future?
I mean, the model that's being described that ACE operates is one of the main models that registered apprenticeship programs use to get credit. The problem is that it's campus by campus, and I think we'd have to work with something to make something like that national, so that if a CNC program got college credit at Piedmont, how do we make sure that anybody else using that curriculum didn't have to go to the expense of getting their program certified point by point? Because basically the same company operates many times in North Carolina, California, Seattle, and Alabama, and the workers at one campus get the credit, but the others don't because they don't have the money to invest to get it recertified. So I think it would be great if we were going to look at something like that, to work with organizations like ACE and others that do that crosswalk for credit. How could we make sure that if a company invested in that same curricula would be viable for credit anywhere in the United States where they did business? I think that would be an incentive, and I think that would be something very interesting to talk to ACE and the others that do that kind of work. Because I think what's been damaging in the building trades, for instance, is that one local union will be wealthy enough to pay for it, and you go to another state and that union's much smaller and doesn't have that much in their health and welfare fund to pay for that. So it ends up being very erratic that people in New Jersey that are working for CWA and apprenticeship programs get college credit, and people who are working in Iowa for CWA don't. So I think we need to figure, before we could have a national policy on that, we'd have to come to some agreement that it wouldn't just be the size of the company base there. Even from a company perspective, I used Siemens before. Siemens may have 1,000 workers in one state and 200 workers in another, and if the economy of scale doesn't allow them to do it in 2 different states. So I think it's something worth pursuing because I think it has real value.
I think we may have our colleagues on the line, so I will, if we hear a voice from above, our prayers will have been answered. Dilip, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay, we can hear you a little bit. And then Bob, are you there?
Is it better?
Yes, I am.
Okay, fantastic.
I can hear and see you guys well, but I think it's a bit of a... We don't have entire communication channels for video and audio in one sync, so never mind.
That's all right. We are listening to you from the ceiling. It's fascinating. I'll turn to both of you now, since you haven't had a chance to do a little bit of the what you do piece. But I think you may have been able to hear at least some of the conversation. So feel free to come in on one of those pieces specifically. I would say, again, particularly Dilip from India, very interested to hear the kinds of things that emerging economies are doing, and countries where manufacturing is taking off and becoming an increasing part of the economy, though there are still obstacles. And then Bob, again from Australia, another advanced economy that struggles with some of the same things the United States does. So Dilip, if I would start with you and go from there.
Okay, thanks. In India, we are actually grappling with 2 things currently, or actually 3 things currently. One, the scale of the problem in India is kind of huge. The next 10 years, if you want to take advantage of the demographic dividend, we have to skill about 500 million people. That's about 50 million people every year. And of course, the economy has to grow to accommodate that many people in jobs. So, typically, the government-led interventions were grant-led interventions. And about 2.5 years ago, we decided to try and experiment with a new model. And I think the model picks on many things that, the panelists actually talked about, whether it's the German example or whether, the whole industry involvement. So there are 5 key pillars of what we are trying to do here. One, it is the whole skill system is one-third of the skill system, which is with the National Skill Development Corporation, is aimed at skilling 150 million people by getting industry involved in a public-private partnership. So, like you heard before, industry determines the occupation standards, they determine the competency levels, they vet the curriculum. They also take part and actually do the assessment and certification. This was because industry in India said that the system is not producing people whom they can employ. So I think the Prime Minister said that, okay, we'll allow the industry to do the curriculum, to do the competency standards and the occupation standards and assess and certify. So therefore, industry would have to actually step up to the plate and deliver. The second thing, rather than going in for a grant model, they said that, can we look at creating a skills industry or in India, which could be not-for-profit or could be for-profit, could be a government entity or could be a non-government entity, an NGO or a firm, and can they actually look at skilling people on a sustainable basis? So NSDC, about 2 years ago, started reaching out to training organizations and companies to set up skill development initiatives, which were outcome-based. So, you had to do 100,000 people over 10 years. You had to ensure that 70% of them were ended up with a livelihood or got a job in industry, and it was done on a sustainable basis. And at the same time, we started setting up sector councils in India, covering the high-growth areas. So what happened in the 2.5 years, we got about 62 organizations taking a kind of a loan or equity investments from the National Skill Development Corporation, which is managing a fund of roughly about $500 million over the last 2.5 years. And they set up training organizations and try to build on the existing capacity of 5 million in India, which you have to take to 50 million in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years. And we also kind of approved 18 sector skill councils going forward. The progress has not, in the context of 150 million, is not much to write home about. We've done about, we did 180,000 people last year. We will do about somewhere between 400,000 and 600,000 people this year. And if we continue at the same pace, we do about 1.3 or 1.4 million the next year through this public-private partnership. So what happens is that these training organizations actually go and contact industry and employers. I'm talking about employers in India because 93% are in the unorganized sector. They're not organized employment. They get the job roles, and they try and match the people and then skill them and place them or give them entrepreneurial opportunity there. So that's what we're trying to do here. And the thing is that NSDC funds these organizations they have to submit 10-year plans and annual plans. So based on the finances that they bring, if they have to bring 25% of the finance, we provide the balance 75% in terms of a soft loan with moratoriums of repayment and a repayment cycle over 10 years. So that's the kind of strategy that we are doing. And, there was also this discussion just a few minutes ago, one of the questions about how do you recognize, prior learning, or how do you do the transition from the vocational to the academic kind of stream. So we are also in the process of developing a kind of a national skills qualification framework. There were 2 frameworks being developed parallelly, the vocational qualification framework and the vocational education qualification framework. Now we are trying to actually do the bridge between the 2 of them. So that's the kind of work that is happening here. And, it is a public-private partnership. Government holds 49% equity. The private sector, and, we heard a lot about NAM. So NAM has a counterpart organization in India called the Confederation of Indian Industry. They have 5.1 equity in NSDC. And like the NAM has the Associations Council with different associations affiliated to it, many of the sectoral associations, including the Auto Association that I used to head prior to this job, have taken 5.1% equity. So we have 10 associations taking equity in NSDC, accounting for 51%, the government taking 49%, and we are managing this fund to promote private sector entrepreneurs in the skills space.
Thanks, Dilip. It's a staggering challenge that you're dealing with, and I'm wondering if in a couple of years you're going to have a skills gap in your skills gap. So there are a whole bunch of people here in the skills building industry. So I think we've all just learned that the growth area for that is in India. Mm-hmm. And so, Bob, why don't we just turn quickly to you, and then we'll take some questions again from the audience and have you as part of our exchange.
Sure. Thanks, Alexei. It's a shame about our connections, but there we go. Look, I think the story from the Australian end is that we've had a significant rise in our trading with the resource sector, oil, gas, minerals, and so on. It's skewed our economy somewhat, but it's been very successful for us. But it's had an impact on the exchange rate of the Aussie dollar to the US and so on. Our interest rates are reasonably high, and we're attractive from a global investment point of view. So, but for domestic manufacturers who are looking at exporting, it's had a significant impact on their business. So the move into service focused economy that also relies heavily around resources has had an impact on manufacturing. What we've done at the government level, we're only 22 million people, but a very large country, but the government has driven, and all types of government, by the way, since the late 80s, we've structured up national policy around things like national vocational training frameworks, national qualifications, qualifications frameworks themselves, and so on, where the skills recognition from one side of the country to the other is consistent, and delivery of training is regulated by through regulatory processes that operate on a national basis. The government has now recently, in the last few years, invested heavily in upskilling existing workers because many, like most countries, many workers didn't hold post-compulsory school qualifications, and also many workers have low levels of literacy and numeracy, and some with language as well, where they weren't viewed to be suitable for working, in contemporary society even. So those sorts of problems are the ones we were trying to address. In the manufacturing sector, trying to make it more competitive has been our strong focus, and our role is to, really convince companies that skilling their workforce is a really good thing, and as well as that we develop the occupational standards that form up the national vocational qualifications for our sector. So the government investment in existing worker training has been really, really good. It's a co-investment model. It involves, depending on the size of the enterprise, but the government could be providing up to 2/3 of the cost of training of those workers, and the focus is on them achieving a qualification under these national frameworks. Our focus again has been particularly with the manufacturing sector, looking at working on them implementing lean processes and so on. So we've got a series of training programs and qualifications that work towards that. So that's where our goals are heading. From a public policy point of view, it's a sound public investment, and it also adds significant value into that purse because even though the financial contribution may be just say 1/3 from the enterprise and 2/3 from government, the overall contribution we see as something more like a matched dollar for dollar activity. So there's an expectation of public investment in training. for existing workers and so on. There's an expectation from enterprises that that will be the case. They're paying company tax and they want a return. But the government's getting a good return as well. So everybody benefits. The economy benefits, productivity rises, community benefits by having skilled people with portable qualifications. So that's good. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I don't know if we had any further questions. I'd like to pick up then. Did you have one? Yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I know you haven't heard from me since this morning, so I thought I would chime in. Since this was a policy section, and we've talked a lot about worker training and skill development, we haven't talked about some of the business policies. So I kind of wanted to direct this to probably Kumar, Jane, Peter, Bob, and Dilip on the line to see, kind of from a policy perspective, how well do you think policymakers understand that to get top-tier worker productivity requires advanced manufacturing processes, and that requires significant capital for businesses to invest, and incentives for those businesses to make those investments, which also requires good business policy and clarity of policy. That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question kind of leads on to what you had said earlier, which says, and how well do they understand that advanced manufacturing processes actually results in fewer direct manufacturing jobs, higher value jobs, and that the real secret to economic growth is actually creating business environments that are favorable enough to grow businesses and to grow the number of businesses. And those things have to go hand in hand with the investment in the workforce, which is the investment, the capital investment, and the business investments, so that there actually are jobs and advanced jobs to place those people. And I think we've got between Peter, Kumar, Jane, Bob, and Dilip, we have a number of policymakers I think could help address this.
Great. Why don't we start on the phone, actually. Dilip, if you had thoughts about that and wanted to respond, I'd welcome you to do so.
Yeah, so, I think the whole thing about capital investment and policy for the manufacturing sector was actually just concluded and discussed a few months ago. And in India, we have what is known as the National Manufacturing Competitiveness Council. And under that, and we still have a system of, trying to develop some 5-year plans. So under the 5-year plan and under the NMCC, we actually came about with a very structured policy initiative to promote talent and growth in the manufacturing sector. So the policy evolves around one kind of enabling industry to actually able to train people. So we're rewriting or relooking at our Apprenticeship Act to allow manufacturers to actually do that. The second is that, investments in skill development and training within the manufacturing sector have been given, 150% weighted kind of a deduction from taxation, so to enable that to happen. And the third is that, NSPC is actually working with the manufacturing sector and the sub-segments in the manufacturing sector to get them to lead the development of skill development and capital investment in the sector. So there's a kind of a strategic national policy. There's vertical policy initiatives in the different segments, if it's pharmaceuticals or chemicals or capital goods or automobile, etc. So sectorally, we're looking at that. And then there is this overall incentive package for companies to invest in that. So the policy is really moving from a government-driven kind of a thing to an employer and a private sector-led thing with minimum hand-holding and supervision from government.
Thanks very much, Bob. Why don't we go to you, and then we'll run through here very quickly. We just have a few minutes left.
Well, I guess, thank you. Dilip's challenges are quite different to ours, but often the approach is the same. I think in the public policy sense, the government clearly recognises the benefit in raising skill levels, which is they're pushing right through the whole economy, at looking for greater participation rate in higher education, greater involvement of people in vocational education and training. So every public policy, whether it's a federal or state and territory government level, still continues to push for that sort of that position. From the business point of view, if reading any of the economic journals or business sections in the newspapers and so on, the word skills pops in at every, it's within the first paragraph every time because of the critical shortage of skills that we have. We have labour shortages as well in many areas, but our migration program is based around skilled people, those that seek migration through the normal channels, that is. We have lots of focus in the whole sort of skills patch because it's seen that we adopted the term workforce development 3 or 4 years ago, and it's become quite common in our language in talking about work because no longer we just talk about skills, but the whole notion of workforce development, which embraces those things like good recruitment and retention policies, good skills bases, ongoing learning, and so on. And these are firmly embedded in public policy and also in now becoming infused in enterprise policy. So I think it's a very positive sort of step forward. No longer is training just seen as an institutional thing and it's the one shot that suits you for life, but we have an approach which is saying we need to change with the times, adapt, and the government is facilitating those changes through skills development programs and other workforce activity.
Thanks very much, and very quick down the line, if we'll take a couple extra minutes. Mary, I'd be curious about your view from working with Brazilians, sort of the prevalence of this issue, the relative sort of, it's a great example, articles in the newspaper are sort of getting to this very quickly. Are they at that level as well, or?
Yes, and I think the question about maybe to the policymaker side, I think that there's some lessons from Brazil about engagement of business, and it's very simple. And I think it's something we miss here quite a bit in this country, and that's make a clear ask and make it pretty straightforward and simple. One of the things that Brazil is doing with their initiative to send 100,000 students to study in STEM careers abroad is they said, we're going to fund 75,000. We want to raise funds for 25,000 students. And they're doing that. So companies are stepping up to help fund that. And the second thing they've asked for is they've asked companies in the United States and around the world to provide internships for Brazilian students so that they work internationally. I think that we always need the employers that are going to get in on a strategic level and go into the complexity and all of that. But we'll only, I think, be able to leverage policy and get the numbers of employers involved if we can have, big picture gains and a very clear ask to say, here's what we need from you. And I think that sometimes we get down into all this detail of collaboration and collaboration clusters and consortium, and we need to be much more, I think, clear and say, we're going to fix this if you come to the table to do something big.
Does that resonate, Jane and Kumar?
I think we're so spoiled because in this administration you're kind of forced, and not only by the president but by the cabinet secretaries, to work together and admit what you don't know and learn from other people so that we get really good. I mean, the fact that we work so closely together was driven at first. Now it's consensual, right? It's consensual friendship now. But, I mean, we have a lot of push and pull. Where I would really, and this is from my prior life, really strongly suggest that business spend a lot more time is on the Hill, because both the House and Senate are so fractured by the committee structure that they see the needs of business from one lens. So the fabulous Senator Harkin and Senator Renzi on the Help Committee only see job training and health care. They don't see tax policy. They don't, so it really is important, and especially now with the turnovers that we're seeing on the Hill because of the change in the pension policy for Hill staffers. You're not seeing people stay for 30 years anymore. You're seeing people come and go, and it really it's great. I know NAM does a lot of reach out to them, but it's really important that businesses reach to those staff people and educate them that if you don't help us in certain tax policy, we can't listen to you on training. If you don't help us in terms of, EPA standards, if you don't, it's across by my count, 10 different committees, you know, and it really, and you get a member who's on 3. So how many times do you have to say to the member, no, I need you to look holistically, and while you're on this committee, I need you to talk to your colleagues on this committee because you're crippling business in your district or your state unless you all come together. I think that's really missing, because what happens many times is people only go to the congressional members with whom they're the most comfortable, and they're not always, you know, it's great to go to Harry Reid and John Boehner, but they don't sit on every committee, and they're not going to get into the weeds like a committee member staff is. So I think that would be my plea to you, because of I wouldn't have been able to do anything that I did half as well without people coming to me and explaining what the impacts would be, not only in my committee, but in other committees across the Senate.
Thanks very much. Yep.
Yeah, I would just say that I think there's a natural sort of policy tension and something that we just constantly have to think about, which is how to think about business cycle short term and ways that government can be playing a really productive policy role, and then thinking about the medium and long. And so there's a set of policy dimensions that policymakers need to be thinking about. So we think a lot about R&D. So how can government be supporting R&D both on direct public investments for R&D, which the president has been very strong on, as well as sort of tax policy as it relates to R&D. We think a lot about infrastructure, and so that's both, direct infrastructure investments that are important for industry, but then also 21st century infrastructure such as broadband, and having those policies set so that you can have industry be able to invest alongside that. I think the alongside that also in infrastructure is what sets of policies allow our federal investments to be able to benefit the private sector. So we think a lot about university commercialization and how do products and services and R&D make it out into the, and what kind of policies would support that. I think education, I sort of think of that as something that, if we're not getting it right, it becomes a huge pain point along the way, as we're experiencing right now. And so we have to make these consistent investments, both on the sort of huge challenges that exist right now towards the unemployed, but then also thinking about these growth sectors. I will say advanced manufacturing is something that, on a policy level, we're extremely excited about. I think there's a lot of interest by industry. We just did one pilot site in Youngstown around advanced manufacturing. We had a lot more uptake than we expected. There's a lot of folks that think additive manufacturing is going to be a really powerful thing, and I think if we make these critical investments now, we get the innovation premium down the road when these jobs are built here.
Thanks. And Peter, this is your chance to answer the question I asked you way back when, which was the sort of policy environment.
To your question, I think that's exactly how German policymakers frame the discussion. Our situation is we have no natural resources of any significance other than the renewables, which we're trying to tap quite strongly. Our population is dwindling, so all we have is human capital. If we don't build that out, then we lose competitiveness. So policies are aimed at staying ahead in terms of skills, human capital, driving innovation and technology, and that being the basis of our competitiveness. This discussion is another piece in the mosaic for me that everybody seems to know in the United States what the issue is and what proven policies are to address it. So our little skills initiative is trying to just build some good practice from the bottom up to help connect those dots. And I'll share with you my policy advice on US-EU trade policy. My only policy advice, and if I can, I'll go out on a bit of a limb. So everybody knows what's going on. My policy advice is do what Professor Robert Lerman says.
All right. Thank you for that. And we are happy for your transatlantic engagement as much as I joke about the Germans coming to educate us. This is exactly the kind of thing the Atlantic Council loves to see, which is learning from our colleagues abroad. I want to thank the panel. I'd especially like to thank our colleagues from India and Australia, who I know are up very late, and so it was great to have you.
Thank you. Well, very early.
2 o'clock in the morning.
Thank you.
In India.
Wow. What we also know in this approach is it really does take action on the ground and an environment that enables. And we have been honored to spend the last hour and a half with leaders representing policymakers across the globe that really care about manufacturing. So thank you all for your time this afternoon. We are going to take a 10-minute break and see if we can't get technology for the last session to come up from the start, so thank you for your patience, especially to our panel members for that. And 10 minutes and we'll get started. And if I can leave a theme for what's coming, it's about letting us lead and what our role is. So 10 minutes.